Chapter 1, Why First Impressions Don't Work Here. Priya joined the analytics team on a Tuesday in March. She wore a sharp blazer, arrived 15 minutes early, and had done enough research to name-drop the company's last 2 quarterly results during introductions. Her manager, Vikram, told a colleague that evening that she seemed really switched on. Her teammates were charmed. By Friday, she had already been included in a lunch she wasn't technically invited to. 6 months later, Vikram couldn't remember the blazer or the quarterly results. What he remembered, what had quietly, stubbornly lodged itself into his perception of Priya, was something else entirely. He remembered that she went quiet in meetings when things got uncomfortable. That she sent follow-up emails only when it benefited her. That she arrived energized on Mondays and visibly disengaged by Thursday afternoons. None of this was catastrophic. None of it would show up in a complaint. But it had accumulated, the way sediment does, into a thick, settled layer of impression that no single good day could dissolve. The blazer had nothing to do with it. The myth we were sold, we have been told, in career books and interview prep guides and LinkedIn posts, that first impressions are everything. That you have 7 seconds, or 30, or 60, depending on which study someone is citing, to make your mark. And in a job interview, a pitch meeting, or a blind date, this is more or less true. You get one shot. The stranger across the table has no prior data on you, so they reach for cues, your posture, your handshake, whether you made eye contact when you introduced yourself. But here is the problem, that is not where you spend your professional life. You do not work with strangers. You work with the same 30, or 300, people, week after week, for years. Your manager sees you in the 9 a.m. stand-up. Your colleagues watch how you behave when a project collapses 2 days before launch. The junior team member you barely noticed has quietly cataloged every time you interrupted someone in a meeting. These people are not forming a first impression of you. They stopped doing that within the first few weeks. What they are doing now is something far more consequential and far less forgiving. They are reading your pattern. What a sustained impression actually is: a sustained impression is not a single moment or a highlight reel. It is the aggregate of hundreds of small, unremarkable interactions over time. It is the answer your colleagues would give if someone asked them, not, "What is Priya like?" but, "What can you count on Priya to do?" That distinction matters more than most people realize. In one-time settings, charisma can carry you. Preparation can carry you. A confident handshake can carry you. But when someone has watched you operate for 8 months, they no longer care about your handshake. They care about what happens when you get credit for something that wasn't entirely your idea. They care about whether you follow through on the small things you said you would do. They care about whether you show the same level of effort when the stakes are low as when someone important is watching. This is what forms the sustained impression, not the performance, but the default. Your default is who you are when no one is keeping score. When the meeting wraps up and there's a half-finished task on the shared drive that nobody owns. When a colleague looks stressed and you have 5 minutes. When you get an email you don't feel like answering. Nobody is grading these moments. But everyone is noticing them. Why this matters more than you think: here is the uncomfortable truth about professional reputation: it builds slowly and it sticks hard. By the time you become aware that someone's perception of you has shifted, that you've gone from reliable to flaky in your manager's internal shorthand, or from collaborative to territorial in your team's informal ranking, the sediment has already settled. Changing it requires months of consistent counter-evidence, not a single impressive project. This asymmetry is brutal. One excellent quarter does not undo 18 months of missed deadlines. One act of generosity does not overwrite a year of hoarding credit. The brain, when assessing familiar people, does not average things out evenly. It weights patterns. It trusts repetition. If you have done something consistently, that becomes the baseline expectation, and everything else is measured against it. The good news is that this asymmetry also works in your favor. If you have spent 18 months being the person who shows up prepared, who listens when others speak, who does what they say they will do, that reputation compounds. People begin extending you the benefit of the doubt. When you make a mistake and it registers as an anomaly, not a confirmation. Your sustained impression becomes a kind of professional credit score, quietly working for you in rooms you are not in. The invisible audience. One of the most useful reframes in professional life is to understand that you are always being assessed, but rarely consciously. Nobody goes home and writes notes about your behavior. Nobody is building a case. What they are doing is updating a mental model, almost automatically, every time they interact with you or observe you interacting with someone else. This invisible audience is not made up of your manager or the CEO or the people with the power to promote you. It is made up of everyone: the intern who watched how you reacted when your idea was rejected, the colleague 2 desks over who noticed you didn't acknowledge the admin when she brought coffee into the boardroom, the project lead who quietly clocked that you always seem to have a reason not to take on the unglamorous work. These observations are not stored as facts. They are stored as feelings, a general sense of whether someone is trustworthy, whether they have integrity, whether they make the room better or worse. And when opportunity arises, a recommendation to make, a team to build, a project to assign, those feelings surface as instinct. I think of Arjun for this, or I'm not sure Priya is the right fit. Nobody quotes a specific incident. They don't need to. The pattern has already spoken. Consistent behavior is a strategic asset. None of this means you need to be perfect. Perfectionism, in fact, is the enemy of what we are talking about here. The sustained impression is not built by never making mistakes. It is built by being predictable in the ways that matter, by having a behavioral baseline that people can trust and plan around. Think of colleagues you genuinely respect. The ones whose name comes up when a hard job needs doing. Chances are, what you respect about them is not a single moment of brilliance. It is the fact that they are the same person on a bad day as on a good one. That they treat the junior analyst with the same consideration they give the senior director. That they do not have a public self and a private self, or if they do, the gap between those two selves is narrow enough that nobody feels deceived. That consistency is not accidental. It is a habit. And like all habits, it can be built deliberately. This is what the rest of this book is about. Not the handshake at the door, but the 10,000 small choices that happen after it. Reflection before moving forward: sit with these questions. Don't rush them. 1. If the 3 colleagues who work closest with you were asked to describe your professional patterns, not your strengths, but your habits, what would they say? Is that the answer you want them to give? 2. Think of a professional reputation you quietly admire. What specific, repeated behaviors have built that reputation over time? How many of those are visible in your own work? 3. When do you tend to behave differently depending on who is watching? What does that gap tell you about where your default behavior actually lives? The silent edge principle: your professional reputation is not what you show on your best day, it is what people can count on you to be on every other day. Chapter 2: The Art of Restraint. Speak less, way more. It is a Tuesday morning. The conference room fills with the usual cast of characters: the project manager with her laptop open, the 2 senior engineers who always sit near the door, and Marcus, the one everyone instinctively watches when something important is being decided. Marcus is not the most senior person in the room. He is not the loudest. In fact, for the first 20 minutes of this meeting, he says almost nothing. He listens. He nods occasionally. He writes something down once. Meanwhile, others debate timelines, interrupt each other, restate points already made, and circle the same argument for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Then the room hits a wall, that particular silence that means no one knows how to move forward. Marcus puts his pen down. He speaks 4 sentences. The room goes quiet. 2 people write things down. The meeting ends 5 minutes later with a clear decision. What just happened? Marcus did not dazzle anyone with vocabulary. He did not dominate the room. He waited, and then he aimed. That is the art of restraint, and it is one of the most misunderstood skills in professional life. The quiet killer of professional reputation. Ask yourself honestly, do you know someone who talks too much in meetings? Of course you do. Now ask the harder question, could that person be you? Overtalking is the single most common image killer in professional settings, and it operates almost invisibly. People who fill every silence with words believe they are demonstrating engagement, knowledge, or enthusiasm. What they are actually demonstrating is anxiety. The compulsive need to speak, to fill air, to be heard, to have the last word reads to everyone else in the room as insecurity dressed up as participation. There is a simple reason for this. When someone speaks constantly, two things happen. First, the sheer volume dilutes the signal. If you talk for 8 minutes in a 10-minute discussion, no single sentence stands out. Your insights get buried in your own noise. Second, people begin to anticipate your contributions the way they anticipate elevator music as background, not content. They stop truly listening, because experience has taught them that they can afford to tune out and catch the important parts later. Except, increasingly, they do not bother. Senior professionals who have spent years observing talent will tell you the same thing. The person who earns a reputation as a thinker is almost never the person who speaks the most. It is the person who speaks well. Precision is rarer than volume, and people pay more attention to what is rare. Silence is not surrender. There is a reason so many people overtalk, and it is worth naming directly. Silence feels dangerous. In a culture that rewards visible hustle and constant performance, staying quiet can feel like opting out. Like you are letting someone else take the credit, define the narrative, or make the decision. This is a misreading of what silence actually does. When you speak less, you create a perceptual shift in the room. People begin to wonder what you are thinking. They assign weight to your consideration. They interpret your quiet attention as depth rather than absence. And when you do speak, you benefit from a kind of contrast effect. Your words arrive against a backdrop of your own restraint, and that backdrop makes them louder. This is not a trick. It is not a performance of silence. It is the natural outcome of a genuine commitment to speaking only when you have something worth saying. The difference matters. Performed silence, the kind where you are visibly brooding or withholding, reads as passive aggression. Authentic restraint, the kind that comes from actually processing before you speak, reads as authority. Leaders understand this instinctively. Watch how a truly respected executive runs a room. They ask questions more than they make statements. They let tension sit for a beat before resolving it. They do not rush to validate every comment made by others. They are comfortable with the weight of a pause, because they know the pause is doing work. The 3-second rule here is a practice you can begin using in your very next meeting, and it costs nothing. The 3-second rule. Before you speak, before you respond to a question, contribute a thought, or react to a comment, pause for 3 full seconds. Count them if you need to. 3 seconds of deliberate silence before opening your mouth. This will feel uncomfortable at first. You will worry that it looks like hesitation, or that someone else will jump in. Sometimes they will. Let them. What you are training is something more valuable than the right to the next word. You are training the habit of choosing your words before you say them. The practical effect of the 3-second rule is significant. First, it eliminates the reflexive filler. I think that what this means is. Preambles, the verbal warm-ups that add length without adding value. Second, it gives your brain a moment to move past its first instinct toward its better instinct. The first thing that comes to mind in a high-pressure conversation is rarely your sharpest thought. Third, it signals, at a level people feel rather than consciously register, that you are the kind of person who thinks before speaking. That perception compounds over time. Practiced consistently, the 3-second rule does not make you slower. It makes you more deliberate. And deliberate is what gets remembered. How to make your words land. Brevity alone is not the goal. The goal is precision, saying exactly what needs to be said, with no waste. Here is what that looks like in practice. Before you contribute to a meeting or conversation, ask yourself a single question. What is the one thing I want this person or room to take away? Not 3 things. Not a full argument. One thing. Then say that thing, clearly, and stop. When you structure your contributions this way, something shifts. People begin to pay attention when you speak because they have learned, over time, that when you open your mouth you are going to give them something they can use. You become, in the most literal sense, a person whose words carry weight because your words have earned that weight through consistent relevance. You also give others the gift of space. When you do not fill every silence, you allow room for others to think, to build on what you have said, to feel that the conversation belongs to all of them. This is, paradoxically, how you become more influential, not by dominating the conversation, but by shaping its direction with targeted, well-timed input. The trap of performing intelligence. There is a particular habit common among ambitious, well-educated professionals that is worth calling out by name: performing intelligence. Performing intelligence is what happens when the goal of speaking is not to communicate, but to be seen as smart. It looks like introducing complexity that does not serve the discussion, or name-dropping frameworks and concepts to establish credentials, or restating a simple point in elaborate language. It is the verbal equivalent of wearing your resume on your sleeve. The problem is that everyone in the room can feel it. They may not be able to articulate what is off, but they sense the gap between communication and exhibition. And it produces the opposite effect of the one intended. Rather than raising your standing, it quietly erodes it, because people begin to sense that you are more interested in being impressive than in being useful. Actual intelligence, in professional settings, looks like clarity. It looks like simplicity. It looks like the ability to cut to the heart of a problem when everyone else is still circling the edges. The person who says the plainest, truest thing in the room almost always wins more respect than the person who says the most sophisticated thing. Restraint, in this sense, extends beyond the quantity of your words to the quality of your intention. Ask yourself, am I saying this to help, or to be seen? The answer will tell you whether to speak. Reflection. Take a few minutes with these questions before moving on. 1. In your most recent meetings, would you characterize yourself as someone who speaks more or less than most others in the room? What drives that pattern? Genuine contribution, or something else? 2. Think of someone in your professional life whose words carry unusual weight. What habits do they have around speaking? How does their restraint, or lack of it, shape your perception of them? 3. Is there a difference between what you say in meetings and what you actually think is worth saying? If so, what is stopping you from closing that gap? The silent edge principle. The rarest thing in any room is a person who speaks only when they have something worth saying, and that rarity is exactly what commands respect. Chapter 3, What Not to Do, Habits That Silently Kill Your Image. Nobody gets fired for being slightly too apologetic in a meeting. Nobody loses a promotion in a single afternoon because they vented to the wrong colleague or wore the wrong outfit on a Tuesday. That's the insidious thing about image erosion. It doesn't happen in dramatic moments. It happens in the quiet accumulation of small, repeated behaviors that colleagues clock, store, and factor into every decision they make about you. The bad news: most of these behaviors feel completely natural. Some even feel virtuous: being agreeable, being transparent, being approachable. The problem isn't the impulse. The problem is that in a professional environment, context transforms meaning. What feels like honesty can read as insecurity. What feels like friendliness can register as weakness. What feels like thoroughness can signal a deep-seated need for approval. This chapter is about naming those behaviors clearly, not to shame you, but because no one else will. The people noticing these habits aren't going to pull you aside. They're just quietly adjusting their assessment of you, one instance at a time. 1. Over-explaining yourself. When you make a decision and someone questions it, there's a pull to explain everything: your reasoning, your sources, your contingencies, your doubts. It feels like transparency. What it communicates is doubt. Authority is not built by justifying yourself, it's built by being right often enough that people stop asking for justification. Every time you over-explain, you invite your audience to audit your thinking in real time, and audits don't project confidence. Consider this: a senior manager asks why you moved a deadline. A professional who over-explains launches into a 4-minute monologue covering team capacity, a vendor delay, a scope change discovered mid-sprint, and 2 things that almost happened but didn't. A professional with quiet authority says, the scope shifted mid-week. I adjusted the timeline to protect quality. Full stop. 1 sentence. The second person sounds like they've been here before. The first sounds like they're waiting to be overruled. The alternative: state your decision, name 1 key reason, and hold the floor with silence rather than more words. 2. Complaining publicly or venting to colleagues. Shared frustration feels like bonding. And in small doses, among genuinely close colleagues, it sometimes is. But most workplace venting isn't bonding, it's damage with a social wrapper. When you complain to colleagues about leadership decisions, workload, or company direction, you create three problems simultaneously. First, you signal that you're not someone who solves problems, you're someone who narrates them. Second, you give others information they can use against you when the political winds shift. Third, you become the person others start to avoid in difficult moments because proximity to your negativity costs them energy. A talented project coordinator spent months venting to her team about a new process she found bureaucratic. She was right, it was clunky. But by the time leadership started identifying who could step into a team lead role, her name wasn't in consideration. She hadn't done anything wrong technically. She had just made it clear, repeatedly and publicly, that she saw problems more readily than solutions. The alternative: take frustrations to a mentor, a trusted friend outside the office, or directly to someone with the authority to change what's bothering you. 3. Being the loudest person in the room. Volume is not the same thing as influence. People who dominate every conversation, who jump in before others finish, who treat meetings like a stage, they are often mistaken for leaders early in their careers. Over time, the effect inverts. Real authority in a room is demonstrated by the quality of what you say and by what happens after you say it. When the loudest person speaks, people wait for them to finish. When the most respected person speaks, people lean in. The difference is not volume, it's weight. Loudness also signals anxiety. The compulsion to fill silence, to be heard, to take up conversational space often comes from a fear of irrelevance. Colleagues sense this even when they can't name it. The alternative: speak less, but make what you say specific, direct, and worth remembering. 4. Gossiping or picking sides in office politics. Office politics exist in every workplace. Navigating them is a skill. Getting consumed by them is a trap. When you gossip, you reveal two things about yourself: that you are willing to betray someone's information for social currency, and that you can't be trusted with sensitive context. Both are career limiting. And here's what nobody tells you: people who enjoy receiving gossip from you are simultaneously filing a mental note that you'll gossip about them too. Picking sides in office feuds is similarly costly. You may feel loyalty is required. It rarely is. Most workplace conflicts resolve or dissolve on their own, and the people who stayed loudly partisan look worse afterward than those who stayed usefully neutral. The alternative: when gossip starts, redirect the conversation or exit it, and never share what you know about anyone unless it serves a clear professional purpose. 5. Dressing below your ambition level. This one makes people uncomfortable to hear, which is exactly why it's worth saying plainly. How you dress communicates what you think of yourself, the room you're in, and the people you're with. You don't need expensive clothes. You need intentional clothes. There's a difference between someone who dresses casually because it's their considered, confident choice and someone who just never thought about it. The first person can carry it. The second person is communicating, without words, that they haven't thought much about how they're received. A developer who consistently shows up to client presentations in a wrinkled t-shirt while the rest of the team dresses to the room is making a statement, whether they intend to or not. The statement isn't "I'm so technically brilliant that appearance doesn't matter." The statement is "this room didn't feel worth preparing for." The alternative: dress one level above your current role, not to impress, but to signal that you take seriously the context you operate in. 6. Saying yes to everything. People-pleasing is one of the most misunderstood professional habits. It looks like generosity. It looks like being a team player. What it actually does is destroy the perceived value of your yes. When you agree to everything, your agreement means nothing. When you never push back, your approval means nothing. When you absorb every request without friction, you stop being a professional with judgment and become a resource to be allocated. Resources don't get promoted. Resources don't get consulted. Resources get managed. There's also a practical problem. Saying yes to everything means delivering on nothing particularly well. A colleague who cheerfully takes on every request and then misses deadlines because they're overextended damages their image far more than if they had declined politely at the outset. The alternative: say yes selectively, explain your reasoning when you decline, and let the quality of your few commitments speak louder than the volume of your many promises. 7. Checking your phone during meetings or conversations. This one is brief because it should be obvious, and yet it happens in almost every meeting, in almost every organization, at every level. When you check your phone while someone is speaking, you are telling them that whatever is on that screen is more valuable than what they are saying. You may not mean that. But meaning and communication are different things. What you communicate is what lands. There's a secondary effect too. In a room full of people, the person who isn't checking their phone becomes notable. Not because it's heroic to leave a phone on the table, but because everyone else is doing the opposite. Presence is rare. Presence is noticed. A simple observation: the most senior, most respected people in most meetings are usually the least distracted. That's not coincidence. The alternative: leave your phone face down or out of reach entirely during any conversation that matters, which is most of them. The thread running through all of it: look at these 7 habits together and a single theme emerges. Each one is a form of seeking something: approval, connection, validation, relief. Over-explaining seeks approval. Venting seeks sympathy. Loudness seeks attention. Gossip seeks belonging. Dressing down seeks comfort. People-pleasing seeks to avoid conflict. Phone checking seeks escape. None of these impulses are wrong. They're human. But professional credibility is built, in part, by managing those impulses in public, by not outsourcing your inner life to the people who need to respect you. The silent habits that command respect operate on the same principle. They are not performances. They are evidence that you don't need the room's validation to feel steady. Reflection 1. Which of these 7 habits do you recognize in yourself, and what does it feel like in the moment when you do it? What need is it satisfying? 2. Think of someone at work whose presence you find genuinely commanding. Which of these habits are absent in how they operate? 3. If you removed your single most damaging habit from this list for the next 30 days, what would change in how people interact with you? The silent edge principle: your image is not built in your best moments, it is steadily eroded or steadily strengthened by the habits nobody is mentioning, but everyone is watching. Chapter 4: Daily Rituals That Build Unspoken Authority. There is a fantasy version of professional success that most people carry around without realizing it. In this version, authority arrives in a single defining moment: the brilliant presentation that silences the room, the crisis handled with flawless composure, the speech that shifts everyone's perception of you overnight. We wait for these moments. We rehearse for them. And then we wonder why, despite the occasional highlight, our standing at work remains frustratingly flat. The truth is less cinematic and more demanding. Authority does not arrive. It accumulates. It is built not in the grand gesture but in the 100 small acts that surround it: the way you walk into a Monday morning meeting, whether you actually sent that email you promised, how your desk looks at 9 a.m., and whether you are the same person on a grinding Thursday as you were on an energetic Tuesday. These are not dramatic moments. Nobody applauds them. But they are exactly the raw material from which professional reputation is forged. What follows are 7 daily rituals that compound quietly over weeks and months into something most people cannot name but everyone can feel: unspoken authority. 1. Show up prepared. Preparation is the most underleveraged power move in professional life. Not because people do not know it matters, they do, but because they underestimate the gap between basic preparation and real preparation. Basic preparation is scanning an agenda 5 minutes before a meeting. Real preparation is knowing who will be in the room, what each person cares about, what was said last time, and what outcome would constitute a successful outcome for everyone involved. It takes 20 minutes the night before. Almost nobody does it. When you walk into a room already knowing what is happening, who is frustrated with what numbers are at stake, where the ambiguity lies, people feel it before you say a word. You ask the question that cuts to the heart of the issue. You are never visibly surprised. You do not need to check your phone for context. Over months, this builds a reputation that is priceless. This person always knows what's going on. That reputation is authority. It was not given to you. You earned it one prepared morning at a time. 2. Be the same person every day. Emotional consistency is one of the rarest professional skills and one of the most quietly powerful. Most people are subtly different people depending on the day: energized on Monday, distracted by Wednesday, visibly depleted by Friday. Their teams notice. Their peers notice. Their managers notice. And even if nobody says it, the variability registers as unreliability. When you are steady, present, and engaged regardless of what the week is throwing at you, people anchor to you. They start to count on you not just for what you deliver but for how you show up. That constancy is a form of leadership even if you have no direct reports. It signals something deeper than professionalism, it signals self-mastery. The compounding effect is that over time, you become the stable reference point in a room full of fluctuating moods. That is a position of quiet power. This does not mean performing false cheerfulness or suppressing all emotion. It means maintaining a baseline of professional steadiness, calm, focused, engaged, that does not swing with the weather of the week. 3. Follow through on small promises. I'll send that over. I'll get you those numbers by end of day. Let me connect you with the right person. These micro-commitments are made dozens of times a week in every workplace. Most of them are forgotten within the hour. The person who made the promise forgets. The person who received it quietly notices. Following through on every small promise, not most of them, every one of them, builds a reputation that takes years to earn and is nearly impossible to fake in the short term. It tells people, this person's word is reliable. That is not a small thing. Reliability is the foundation of trust, and trust is the foundation of influence. If people know you will do what you said you would do, they begin to give you more responsibility, more information, and more access. None of it was announced. It compounded. If you are prone to forgetting, keep a simple running list of commitments made each day. Review it before you leave. Nothing fancy. Just the practice of keeping your word, consistently, on the small things. 4. Arrive early and leave right. Arrival time and departure time communicate more than you think. The person who consistently rushes and looking scattered, coat half on, coffee in one hand and phone in the other, even if brilliant once they settle, has already sent a message before they have spoken. The message is, I am not in control of my time. Arriving 5 to 10 minutes early is not about optics. It is about the state you are in when things begin. You have a moment to observe the room, read the energy, review your notes, and choose your posture. You are settled before the meeting starts rather than catching up throughout it. Leaving right does not mean leaving at the stroke of 5 regardless of what is happening. It means not being the person who is always scrambling at the end of the day, visibly overwhelmed, trailing deadlines out the door. It means managing your day well enough that you can close it with some semblance of intention. That kind of daily closure is a discipline that compounds into the impression of someone who has their work under control, because they do. 5. Keep a clean, organized workspace. Your workspace is a silent broadcast about your internal state. A desk in chronic disarray signals a mind in chronic disarray. Whether that is fair or not, it is the inference people draw. A clean, organized workspace signals discipline, attention to detail, and respect for your environment. This does not require minimalism or aesthetic obsession. It requires a daily 2-minute reset, papers filed or cleared, tools returned to their place, nothing piling up without purpose. The compounding effect is subtle but real. When someone glances at your workspace, they form an impression. Over time, that impression becomes part of how they think about you. Let it be a good one. 6. Acknowledge others' work. Brief, genuine acknowledgement of someone else's contribution is one of the most underused tools of professional influence. Not performative praise. Not loud public flattery. A quiet, that was a strong analysis you put together, it made the decision a lot cleaner. Said once, in private or in a small group, and meant. People remember who noticed them. They remember who made them feel seen when others moved on without a word. Over time, genuine acknowledgement builds loyalty and goodwill that functions like social capital. You did not ask for it. You earned it by paying attention and taking 30 seconds to say something real. The key word is genuine. If it is not true, do not say it. People are exquisitely good at detecting performance. But if it is true, and usually something genuinely good is happening around you, if you look for it, say it. The compounding return on authentic recognition is remarkable. 7. Read the room. Every organization has a visible hierarchy and a real one. The real one is made of relationships, trust, informal influence, and institutional knowledge, and it does not always match the org chart. The person who understands this landscape and navigates it with intelligence will always move faster and more effectively than the person who only follows formal channels. Reading the room means paying attention to who people actually go to when they need something done. It means noticing who the informal connectors are, who holds institutional memory, who can greenlight something off the record before it reaches a formal decision. It means building genuine relationships with those people, not transactionally, not cynically, but because they are worth knowing and because real relationships are the infrastructure of real influence. This is a long game. It requires observation, patience, and the willingness to invest in people without an immediate return. But over months and years, the person who has done this quiet relational work finds doors open that others cannot even see. The 30-day challenge: pick any 3 of the 7 rituals above. Commit to practicing all 3, every working day, for 30 days. Track them simply: a checkmark in a notebook, a note on your phone, whatever you will actually use. Do not aim for perfection. Aim for consistency. At the end of 30 days, notice 2 things: how the habits feel, easier, more automatic, less effortful, and how others around you seem to respond. You may not be able to name the shift, but it will be there. Suggested combinations: for those who want to be seen as more reliable, rituals 1, 3, and 4. For those who want to build stronger relationships, rituals 2, 6, and 7. For those who want to project greater discipline, rituals 4, 5, and 1. Reflection 1. Which of these 7 rituals do you already practice consistently, and which one, if you are honest, do you most often skip? 2. Think of someone at work whose authority you respect without fully being able to explain why. Looking at this list, which of these habits do you suspect they practice? 3. If you had to choose the single ritual that, if practiced daily for 6 months, would most change how your colleagues perceive you, which one would it be, and what is stopping you from starting tomorrow? The silent H principle: authority is not something you project once, it is something you prove every day, in the details everyone notices and no one discusses. Chapter 5: Confidence versus Arrogance. The thin line: picture 2 people in the same quarterly review meeting. The numbers aren't good. The room is tense. The first person, let's call her Maya, sits with her hands resting on the table. When the VP asks what went wrong, she doesn't flinch. She says, "We missed the target. Here's what I got wrong in my forecast, here's what the team did well, and here's exactly what we're changing next quarter." She doesn't sound defeated. She doesn't sound defensive. She sounds like someone who has already processed the disappointment and moved forward. The second person, call him Derek, leans back in his chair before the question is even finished. "Look, I've been saying for months that the projections were unrealistic," he says, glancing around the room to make sure everyone registered that. He pivots to talking about what other teams didn't deliver. His voice gets a little louder than necessary. By the end of his answer, he's talking about his track record at his previous company. Maya and Derek might both be skilled. They might have similar titles, similar experience, even similar results on paper. But one of them commands the room, and one of them drains it. One of them people trust instinctively, the other, people learn to manage around. The difference isn't talent. It isn't even performance. It's the presence they carry, and what that presence signals to everyone watching. Why confident people are magnetic and arrogant people are merely tolerated. Confidence communicates security. When someone is genuinely confident, they are not threatened by your competence. They don't need you to be smaller for them to feel larger. That absence of threat is something people feel immediately, even if they can't name it. It creates psychological safety. It makes people want to be in the room with you. Arrogance communicates the opposite. Underneath the bluster is a person who needs the room to confirm their worth. They are in a constant, low-grade competition with everyone around them. And people feel that too, the way they feel a room get tighter when someone enters who needs to win every interaction. The result: confident people draw others in. Arrogant people get avoided whenever possible and tolerated when not. This isn't a judgment about character. It's a description of function. Arrogance doesn't work, not sustainably, not in environments where you depend on other people's best thinking, trust, and goodwill. Which is every professional environment that matters. The 5 specific differences. 1. Confident people listen. Arrogant people wait to talk. Genuine confidence means you're not afraid of what someone else might say. You can take in information, sit with it, even be changed by it, and that won't undo you. Arrogance cannot afford real listening. If you listen, you might have to update your position. You might have to say, "I hadn't thought of that." And for someone whose identity is built on being the smartest person in the room, that feels like a loss. Watch someone in a conversation. Are they tracking what you're saying, or tracking when you'll stop? The body language gives it away, the slight lean forward, the half-formed response already forming on the lips. Arrogant people aren't in dialogue. They're waiting for their next turn to broadcast. 2. Confident people admit mistakes. Arrogant people deflect blame. This is perhaps the starkest dividing line. It takes a certain kind of internal security to say I was wrong in front of colleagues and move on without drama. Confident people can do this because their sense of self isn't riding on being infallible. Mistakes are data. They're adjustable. For the arrogant, a mistake is an existential threat. The whole scaffolding, the reputation, the persona, the need to be seen as exceptional wobbles every time something goes wrong. So blame gets redirected. Circumstances get invoked. Other people's failures get spotlighted. The irony is that the deflection is far more damaging to reputation than the original mistake would have been. Everyone in the room knows what happened. They're watching to see if you know it too. 3. Confident people lift others. Arrogant people compete with them. Secure people can say that was a great idea and mean it. They can pull someone junior into a conversation, credit them publicly, advocate for their promotion. Their success isn't diminished by the success of others. Arrogant people experience other people's success as subtraction. If you shine, they're somehow duller. So they minimize, they interrupt, they subtly redirect credit. In meetings, they restate others' ideas in slightly different language as if originating them. They don't always know they're doing it. Over time, this pattern makes everyone around an arrogant person smaller and more guarded. It destroys the collaborative trust that actually makes teams perform. 4. Confident people are calm under pressure. Arrogant people get louder. Pressure is a reveal. When things are smooth, the difference between confidence and arrogance can be subtle. When things go sideways, it becomes obvious. Confident people lower their register under pressure. Their movements get more deliberate. Their voice steadies. Not because they're indifferent to the stakes, but because they've developed the internal regulation to stay functional when it matters. Arrogant people escalate. Volume goes up. Certainty gets performative. Others get blamed faster. The emotional temperature they're generating becomes one more problem the room has to manage on top of the actual problem. Calm is not passivity. It's a form of leadership. It signals to everyone around you, this person can handle this. That signal, sent consistently over time, is exactly what earns trust. 5. Confident people don't need the last word. This one is quiet but diagnostic. Confident people can let a conversation end without winning it. They can let someone else's point stand, acknowledge ambiguity, say "I'll think about that," and not feel diminished. Arrogant people can't leave well enough alone. They circle back. They add the qualifier. They send the follow-up message that reasserts their position. Because the conversation isn't really about the topic, it's about establishing dominance within the interaction. Not needing the last word signals something important: I know who I am regardless of how this exchange ends. That kind of self-possession is rarer than it should be, and people notice it. The imposter confidence trap. There is a version of confidence that is performance rather than substance, and it's important to call it out, because many people who are trying to build confidence end up building this instead. Imposter confidence is the external simulation of security without the internal architecture to back it up. It shows up as forced eye contact, rehearsed power phrases, deliberate posture. It's confidence as costume. It doesn't work for long. People can sense the gap between the presentation and what's underneath. And the performer knows it too, which is why imposter confidence tends to be brittle. It breaks under real pressure and retreats into either self-doubt or arrogance, depending on the person's default coping pattern. Real confidence isn't built through affirmation exercises or mirror pep talks. It's built through competence. Through doing hard things and discovering you can survive when they don't go perfectly. Through accumulating evidence, not from others telling you you're good, but from yourself knowing what you can do. The path to genuine confidence runs directly through discomfort. You get better at something difficult. You fail and recover. You know more than you did last year. That accumulated knowledge of yourself, what you can handle, where your limits are, how you think under pressure, that is confidence. It doesn't need to announce itself. Why arrogance is usually a fear response. This is worth sitting with. Arrogance is almost always defensive. Underneath the bravado is usually someone who is deeply afraid of being exposed as insufficient. The performance of superiority is the armor. The need to dominate conversations, deflect blame, minimize others, these are not the behaviors of someone who feels secure. They are the behaviors of someone who believes, at some level, that without the performance, they would be found lacking. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing arrogant behavior. It doesn't mean letting it damage you or your team. But it does change how you respond to it. When someone comes at you with arrogance, dismissing your idea, talking over you, claiming credit, you're not dealing with strength. You're dealing with a particular kind of fear wearing a mask. That reframe is useful. It keeps you from either shrinking in response or mirroring the behavior. You can stay grounded. You can respond to the actual content without being drawn into the status game they're trying to play. Self-assessment sidebar: which am I right now? Take a moment to answer honestly. These questions aren't about your best self, they're about your current patterns. In the last week, how many times did you genuinely change your mind based on something a colleague said? If the answer is 0, consider whether you're actually listening or waiting. When the last thing went wrong on your team, what was your first instinct, to understand what happened or to establish what wasn't your fault? Neither instinct makes you a bad person. But the second one, if it's automatic, is worth examining. When someone junior to you had a good idea in a meeting, did you amplify it or did you let it pass? What you do with other people's good ideas says more about your confidence than what you do with your own. How often do you feel like you need to win a conversation? Occasionally that instinct is appropriate. If it's constant, it may be running on fear rather than genuine conviction. No scoring. Just noticing. Honest noticing over time is how patterns change. Reflection 1. Think of someone in your professional life, past or present, who embodied genuine confidence. What specific behaviors communicated that? What did they do when they were wrong? 2. Is there an area of your work where you feel least confident right now? What would building real competence in that area look like, not the performance of competence, but the actual thing? 3. If you're honest, is there someone in your life whose competence you find threatening? What does that reaction tell you about where your own confidence still needs work? The silent edge principle: confidence doesn't need an audience, it just keeps doing the work. Next chapter, the art of strategic silence, when saying nothing communicates everything. Chapter 6, Body Language and Presence. Own a room without owning the conversation. She walks in 2 minutes before the meeting starts. No announcement. No apology for the noise of the door. She moves at a measured pace, not rushed, not performatively slow, and scans the room once with calm, steady eyes. She chooses a seat with a clear sightline to the whiteboard and sets her notebook on the table. She doesn't check her phone. She doesn't fidget with her pen. She sits upright, shoulders back, hands resting open in front of her. Nobody has said a single word to her yet. But the room has already noticed. Other conversations have quietly tapered off. 2 people have adjusted their own posture. The person who was slouching over their laptop has, without realizing it, sat up a little straighter. She hasn't spoken. She hasn't needed to. Her body made the statement before her mouth could. This is presence. And it is entirely learnable. Why body language matters more at work than anywhere else. Most people think about body language in high-stakes, one-time moments, the job interview, the pitch, the first date. But in a long-term workplace setting, nonverbal signals carry even more weight. The reason is pattern recognition. Your colleagues, your manager, your direct reports, they see you repeatedly. They are not forming a first impression every morning. They are updating a running model of who you are. And the data they feed into that model is, overwhelmingly, nonverbal. How you carry yourself when you're tired. How your face responds when something goes wrong. Whether your posture shifts when a senior leader enters the room. Over time, these patterns calcify into reputation. Not the reputation you've announced in performance reviews, but the one people hold in the back of their minds when your name comes up in a room you're not in. The good news, this works in your favor just as easily as against you. You have more control over this signal than you likely realize. The 6 body language signals that command quiet respect. 1. Posture. The baseline signal. Posture is the signal that never turns off. It's broadcasting before you open your mouth and after you stop talking. And because it's always on, it functions as a baseline assumption about you. Slumped posture, rounded shoulders, sunken chest, chin angled down, communicates one thing above all else: low energy, low confidence, or low investment. It doesn't matter what you're actually feeling. That's what it reads as. Upright posture, spine long, shoulders rolled back and down, head balanced directly over the spine, reads as alert, engaged, and grounded. It takes up appropriate space without being aggressive. It says, I am here and I am paying attention. You don't need to sit rigid like a soldier. That reads as anxious, not confident. The target is relaxed uprightness, the natural posture of someone who is comfortable with where they are. 2. Eye contact, engaged, not interrogating. The quality of your eye contact tells people whether you're actually listening or just waiting to talk. It's one of the fastest ways to make someone feel seen or dismissed. The mistake most people make is binary: either they avoid eye contact, which reads as evasive or insecure, or they hold it too long, which reads as aggressive or unsettling. Neither is the goal. What works is warm, attentive eye contact broken naturally. When someone is speaking to you, hold their gaze through their thought, then let your eyes move briefly as you absorb what they said. When you're speaking, make eye contact with different people in the room, not a rapid scan, but deliberate, brief connections. This distributes your attention and draws people in rather than locking one person down. In a meeting, eye contact with the speaker while others are scrolling their phones is itself a statement. It is visible. People notice. 3. The calm reaction, composure under surprise. How you react when caught off guard is one of the most revealing nonverbal signals you produce at work. A flinch, an eye roll, a flash of visible frustration, a face that reads, I didn't expect that and I'm not happy about it. These micro-expressions are broadcast faster than you can control them, and people read them with remarkable accuracy. The professionals who command deep respect are the ones whose face stays neutral under pressure. Not blank, not fake cheerful, neutral. They absorb the unexpected with a brief pause, a slow breath, a calm nod. The message it sends: nothing rattles me. I process things before I react. This is trainable. The next time you're in a meeting and something surprises you, consciously slow your breathing before you respond. Let your face stay still for 2 seconds. That pause is not weakness, it's control. And control, in a room full of reactive people, is rare enough to be remarkable. For how you enter a room, the first 5 seconds the way you walk into a room sets a frame that is difficult to undo. A rushed, apologetic, eyes-down entrance creates an immediate deficit. It communicates anxiety, and anxiety is contagious. People begin to feel slightly less certain of the meeting before it has started. A purposeful entrance looks like this: normal pace, not hurried. Head level, not scanning the floor. Eyes that move around the room with casual interest rather than darting with nerves. A brief, natural acknowledgement of who is already there, a nod, a quiet hello, without the need to perform arrival. You are not making a grand entrance. You are simply walking in like someone who belongs there, which, because you do, should not require effort. The practice is removing the habits that undermine it. 5. The handshake and greeting presence. The handshake has not disappeared. And even in contexts where it has been replaced by a nod or a wave, the greeting moment still carries weight. A firm, brief handshake with eye contact and a genuine expression says, "I see you, I'm glad to meet you, I'm not anxious about this." It takes 3 seconds. It lasts in the other person's mind far longer. What undermines it? A limp grip reads as disengaged, a crushing grip reads as aggressive or compensating, looking away during the shake reads as distracted or insecure, and the two-handed shake with someone you don't yet know well reads as trying too hard. Match the handshake to the moment. Be present for the duration of the greeting. Then move on without ceremony. 6. How you sit in meetings. Your posture in a meeting is not neutral. It is a continuous statement about how much you care about what is happening. Leaning slightly forward, elbows on the table, weight toward the conversation, signals engagement. It is a physical expression of investment. Not hovering over the table, but present, directed, attentive. Leaning back with arms crossed reads as skeptical, closed, or checked out. Leaning back with arms open and hands behind your head reads as either confident or dismissive, depending on context. Slumping in a rolling chair while staring at your phone reads as exactly what it is. And about the phone, put it face down or out of sight entirely. Every glance at the screen is a small withdrawal from the room. People track this, even when they're pretending not to. The mirror effect here is something that makes body language worth taking seriously beyond personal branding. Your nonverbal signals change how other people behave around you. When you sit upright, people in your immediate space tend to sit up slightly. When you speak slowly and calmly, others in the conversation slow their own pace. When your face stays neutral during tension, the emotional temperature of the room drops. This is not a metaphysical claim, it is basic social psychology. Humans are highly attuned to the nonverbal cues of the people around them, and we unconsciously synchronize with those we pay attention to. The implication is significant. Your body language is not just about how you look. It is about the emotional climate you create. If you want a calmer meeting, be the calmest person in the room. If you want more engagement from your team, demonstrate engagement first. The danger of nervous habits: pen clicking, leg bouncing, repeated nodding at everything someone says, pulling at a sleeve, adjusting your glasses every 40 seconds. These habits are self-soothing mechanisms, your body managing its own discomfort. And in isolation, each one is trivial. Together, or repeated often enough, they become a dominant signal. They tell the room that you are in some ongoing low-grade state of anxiety, whether or not you feel that way consciously. The fix is not suppression. Trying to hold still while still feeling the urge tends to make things worse. The fix is breath regulation. Slow, deliberate breathing before and during high-visibility situations reduces the nervous system activation that produces these habits in the first place. Over time, the habits fade because the underlying drive diminishes. Awareness is the first step. Record yourself in a meeting. Watch the playback with the sound off. You will notice things you have never noticed before. Dressing as body language wardrobe is nonverbal communication. This is not about fashion or vanity, it is about signal management. What you wear communicates your relationship to the environment, how seriously you take it, how you see yourself within it, and how much thought you invest in how you show up. A person who consistently dresses slightly above the baseline of their environment is sending a quiet message of ambition and self-respect. A person who consistently dresses below it is sending a different one. This does not mean formal wear in a casual office. It means clean, intentional, and appropriate clothes that fit properly, that are in good condition, and that reflect some degree of thought. The signal is not "I am dressing to impress you." It is "I take this environment seriously enough to show up prepared." When in doubt, dress for the role you are working toward, not the one you currently hold. Practical exercise: the 5-minute mirror. Set up your phone or laptop camera and run a 5-minute mock meeting. Talk through a project update, work through a hypothetical problem, whatever you'd normally do. Then watch the recording with the sound off. Look for your default posture, how often you touch your face or hair, whether your shoulders creep up toward your ears, what your expression does when you pause to think, and what your hands are doing when you're not gesturing. Most people are surprised by what they see. The gap between how you feel inside and how you read on camera is real. The exercise doesn't require judgment, it just requires that you know what you're actually projecting, rather than what you assume you are. Do it once a month. After 3 months, watch the earliest and latest recordings side by side. Reflection: think of a colleague who commands respect without demanding it. What are 2 or 3 specific nonverbal behaviors you associate with them? In what situations does your body language most contradict your intentions? Where does anxiety or distraction show up in your physicality? If a new hire watched you for a full workday with no context about your role, what would your body language tell them about how you feel about your work? The silent edge principle: your body makes a promise to the room before you say a word. Make sure it's a promise you intend to keep. Chapter 7: Becoming the go-to person in your domain. For the first 2 years, nobody gave Rashid a special title. His business card said the same thing it always had: data analyst, operations. He attended the same stand-ups, filed the same reports, and sat in the same cluster of desks near the window. But somewhere around month 18, something had shifted, and everyone in the department could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. When the logistics system threw an error nobody recognized, people went to Rashid. When a new supplier integration needed a sanity check, someone would say, quietly, run it by Rashid first. When the VP of operations needed to understand why the numbers from Q3 didn't match the projections, she didn't call a meeting, she walked to Rashid's desk. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't lobbied for it. He hadn't given a single presentation about his skills or sent a single email positioning himself as the department's subject matter expert. What he had done, quietly and without fanfare over those 18 months, was become genuinely irreplaceable in a specific domain. And that was more powerful than any title. What go-to status actually means: being the go-to person in your domain is not the same as being the busiest person on the team. Busyness is visible. It is easy to confuse volume of activity with depth of value. The busiest person in any office is often stretched too thin to be truly exceptional at anything. They handle more. They are rarely the person others trust with the hardest, most consequential problems. Go-to status is about something narrower and more durable. When a specific kind of problem arises, your name comes up first. Not because you campaigned for it. Not because you reminded people of your expertise at every opportunity. But because, over time, you have established a track record so consistent and a level of knowledge so genuine that calling on you has become the obvious, sensible thing to do. This is a qualitative shift, not a quantitative one. It is not about doing more, it is about being the person who understands a particular territory more deeply than anyone else around you, and about demonstrating that depth through what you do, not what you say. The difference between useful and indispensable: useful is the baseline. Showing up, doing what you're asked, meeting deadlines, this makes you useful. Most professionals are useful. It keeps you employed. But useful is interchangeable. If you left tomorrow, someone else could be trained to fill the gap in a few weeks. Indispensable is different. Indispensable means that when you leave, the team feels it. Not because of your personality or your relationships, though those matter, but because your absence creates a genuine knowledge gap. You have accumulated institutional understanding, domain expertise, and pattern recognition that cannot be quickly replicated. You have become part of the team's load-bearing structure, not just its furniture. The gap between useful and indispensable is not filled by working harder. It is filled by knowing more, and by deploying what you know in ways that solve real problems at the right moment. Effort is the price of entry. What takes you beyond useful is depth. Developing domain depth: most people do their job. Fewer people master the domain their job sits inside. Mastery means going beyond the requirements of your role and into genuine curiosity about the territory it occupies. If you are in finance, mastery is not just learning the tools your company uses, it is understanding why those tools exist, what problems they were designed to solve, where they fall short, and what the best practitioners in the field are doing that your organization hasn't tried yet. If you are in customer experience, Mastery is not just handling escalations well, it is understanding customer psychology, the operational levers that create or destroy satisfaction, and the upstream decisions that produce the problems you spend your days resolving. This kind of depth does not happen by accident. It requires deliberate investment over time, reading beyond what your role demands, seeking out colleagues in adjacent functions to understand how your domain intersects with theirs, volunteering for the edge cases and the ambiguous problems that fall outside the normal workflow. Edge cases are where real understanding gets built. Anyone can handle the standard request. The person who handles the weird, difficult, undocumented situation and handles it well is the person who learns what no manual can teach. The key constraint is focus. Depth requires choosing a domain and staying with it long enough to get past the surface. This is harder than it sounds in environments that reward versatility and rotation. But a working knowledge of 10 areas is not the same as genuine command of one. Pick your territory deliberately. Solving problems before they're reported. There is a category of professionals who wait for problems to arrive and then resolve them. They are reactive, reliable, perhaps even good, but fundamentally passive. And then there is a smaller category, people who notice problems forming before they surface, and who quietly address them while everyone else is still unaware that anything is wrong. The difference between these two modes is not intelligence, it is attention, paired with domain knowledge. When you understand your territory deeply enough, you begin to see the early signals. The metric that is drifting. The dependency that has not been tested in 6 months. The process that only works because a specific person is doing it manually and has never mentioned it to anyone. Developing the habit of proactive problem solving means building a regular practice of looking ahead, not just at your current task. It means asking, what could go wrong here, and is there anything I can do now to prevent it? Not anxiously, but as a form of professional maintenance, the way a pilot runs a pre-flight check, not because they expect failure, but because they understand that small problems caught early never become big ones. When you solve a problem that nobody knew existed yet, your value becomes visible in a particular way. People experience relief without quite knowing why. The crisis that didn't happen. The delay that was somehow avoided. You don't need to announce it. The pattern of smooth outcomes in your area tells its own story. Knowing who knows what one form of go-to status has nothing to do with what you know personally, it has to do with what you know about who to call. In any organization, knowledge is distributed unevenly and often invisibly. The person who solves problems fastest is rarely the person with all the answers. They are the person who knows exactly who to ask. This connective tissue, knowing the landscape of expertise around you, is itself a form of mastery. It requires genuine curiosity about your colleagues, their backgrounds, and the problems they have spent years thinking about. It requires paying attention when someone mentions a past project or a previous role that seems unrelated to the current context. That detail is often the detail that becomes useful 9 months later. When someone comes to you with a problem outside your area and you are able to say, "You should talk to Mira about this, she built something similar at her last company," you have provided real value without pretending to be the expert. And Mira, when she helps them, will remember how she got the introduction. This web of referrals and connections is how go-to people extend their reach well beyond the boundaries of their formal domain. Helping without being asked. The most quietly powerful habit of the go-to person is one that is almost impossible to fake, helping without being asked, and doing it without drawing attention to the fact that you've done it. This is not the same as volunteering loudly for visible projects. That is strategy, and most people can see it for what it is. The kind of helping we are talking about here is smaller and more consistent. You notice a colleague struggling with something you understand well, and you send them a 2-line note explaining the part they are stuck on. You see a gap in a report that nobody else has caught, and you fix it before the document goes out. You remember that someone mentioned a deadline next week and you check in, not to be seen checking in, but because you actually care whether the deadline lands. None of this earns you immediate credit. That is precisely the point. Helping without expectation of immediate return is what builds the kind of professional reputation that no amount of self-promotion can replicate. It is slow. It is cumulative. And over time, it produces the deepest kind of trust, the kind people do not consciously decide to extend, but simply feel. Making your expertise visible without self-promotion. There is a persistent misconception that building go-to status requires broadcasting your expertise. That you need to speak up in meetings, position yourself in communications, and make sure everyone knows what you know. This approach tends to produce people who are known for wanting to be known, which is not the same as being trusted. Genuine expertise becomes visible through the quality of what you produce and the way you engage with problems. When you consistently ask the right question in a meeting, the one that cuts to the actual issue, people notice. When you deliver a piece of analysis that is not only accurate but clearly explains what it means and what should happen next, that document travels further than you think. When you solve a difficult problem and write it up in a way that makes the solution reusable for others, your name becomes attached to that solution permanently. Let the work carry your name. Write things down. Share what you learn in ways that help others without lecturing them. Be the person whose output quality sets a standard that gradually becomes the team's new baseline. These are the mechanisms by which expertise becomes reputation without a single word of self-advocacy. The generalist trap. Versatility is genuinely valuable. The ability to move across functions, adapt to different contexts, and hold many things at once is a real skill. But there is a version of versatility that becomes a trap. The professional who has spent years accumulating broad exposure and shallow roots, who knows a little about everything and a lot about nothing. In many organizations, this person is liked. They are easy to work with, flexible, always available to help with whatever is needed. But when the hard problem arrives, the one that requires real knowledge, not just competence, they are not the first call. They are not the second call either. And over time, the mismatch between their perceived value and their actual indispensability creates a quiet career stagnation that can be genuinely difficult to diagnose. The antidote is not to abandon breadth. It is to ensure that somewhere inside your professional identity, there is at least one domain in which you have gone deep enough to have an opinion that matters, a judgment that others trust, and a track record that speaks. One pillar of genuine mastery changes the calculus entirely. Domain map exercise. To identify your best opportunity to become the go-to person in your organization, work through these 4 questions honestly. Where is there a genuine knowledge gap? Walk through your team or department and map what you observe. Which areas are covered by people who are leaving, burning out, or clearly underinvested? Which problems keep recurring because no one has ever truly mastered the underlying system? This is where opportunity lives. Where do you already have a head start? Go-to status is not always built from scratch. Sometimes you are already further along in a domain than you realize. You simply have not gone the last mile into genuine mastery. What do colleagues already come to you for, even informally? That signal is worth following. What can you sustain genuine curiosity about? Depth requires time. Mastery in a domain you find inherently boring is possible but fragile. You will stop going deeper at precisely the moment when going deeper is what matters. Choose a domain that genuinely interests you, even if that interest is still early stage. What is the highest leverage domain for your team's actual goals? Not all domains matter equally. The go-to person in a domain nobody cares about has limited impact. Map your area of chosen depth against what your team or organization most needs to solve, and orient toward the intersection. Reflection 1. What is the one domain within your current role where you could invest the next 12 months in building a level of knowledge that would make you genuinely difficult to replace? What is stopping you from starting that investment now? 2. Think about the last time a significant problem arose in your area. Were you among the first people called? If not, who was, and what do they have that you don't yet? 3. When did you last help a colleague quietly, without being asked and without mentioning it afterward? How often does that happen? What would it take for it to become a consistent habit rather than an occasional one? The silent edge principle. The go-to person is not the loudest voice in the room, they are the one the room goes quiet for. Chapter 8, Managing Up. How to handle your boss. Marcus and Delia were hired the same month, into the same department, under the same manager, a sharp, perpetually overscheduled director named Renata. Both were competent. Both had good instincts. Both wanted to be promoted within 2 years. 18 months later, Marcus was still waiting. He did his work well, never caused problems, and assumed that Renata noticed. He answered her questions when asked, showed up to one-on-ones without much of an agenda, and privately complained to colleagues that Renata didn't seem to appreciate what he contributed. He was waiting to be seen. Delia had a different theory. She spent her first 60 days figuring out how Renata's mind worked, what she worried about, what she needed to know before walking into her own boss's meetings, where she was exposed. Delia started sending a brief Friday update without being asked. When she hit a snag on a project, she came to Renata not with a problem, but with 3 options and a recommendation. When she disagreed with a decision, she said so clearly once and then executed the final call without resentment. By month 18, Renata had mentioned Delia's name in 2 conversations with senior leadership unprompted. Marcus had not been mentioned once. The difference was not performance. It was strategy. What managing up actually means: let's clear something up immediately, because the phrase has a bad reputation it mostly doesn't deserve. Managing up is not flattery. It is not reading your boss's horoscope and telling them what they want to hear. It is not playing politics or manufacturing visibility or learning to laugh at the right jokes. Anyone who defines it that way has confused managing up with something far cheaper: people-pleasing. What managing up actually means is this: understanding what your manager needs from you in order to do their job well, and then delivering that proactively, consistently, without being asked. That's it. It's applied intelligence in the context of a specific relationship. Your manager is not your audience. They are your partner in a particular organizational dynamic. They have goals, pressures, blind spots, and a boss of their own. When you manage up effectively, you are not performing for them, you are reducing friction in a working relationship that has a direct impact on your career, your daily experience, and your ability to get things done. The irony is that most professionals invest almost no conscious effort in this relationship at all. They show up, do their work, and assume the relationship will take care of itself. It won't. Like any relationship, it requires attention. The boss profile: mapping what your manager actually values before you can give your manager what they need. You have to know what that is. And the answer varies more than most people expect. Some managers care most about outcomes: hit the number, deliver the result, and they'll leave you alone entirely. Others care about process visibility: they want to know what you're working on, even if the outcome is fine. Some managers are relationship driven and will reward you for connecting on a personal level. Others find small talk exhausting and want you to get to the point within the first 30 seconds of every conversation. Here is a simple framework for mapping your manager in the first 90 days, or today, if you've been working with them for years but never thought about it this way. Axis 1: Outcome versus process. Does your manager ask, "How is it going?" or "What's the status?" One is checking in on you, the other is tracking the work. Match your communication style accordingly. Axis 2: Detail versus summary. When your manager reads a project update, do they ask follow-up questions about the specifics, or do they want the headline and nothing more? If you give a detail-oriented manager a 3-sentence summary, they feel uninformed. If you give a summary-oriented manager a 12-paragraph breakdown, they feel buried. Axis 3: Risk tolerance. Does your manager encourage you to experiment and flag only when things go badly wrong? Or do they want early warning signals on anything uncertain? This single axis determines whether your silence reads as confidence or negligence. Axis 4: Recognition style. Does your manager acknowledge effort and intention, or only outcomes? Knowing this tells you how to frame setbacks, whether to lead with what you tried, or cut straight to what you'll do differently. You learn these things by watching and listening carefully in the first weeks, and by asking 1 or 2 direct questions early in the relationship. How do you prefer to get updates on in-progress work, and what's the best way to flag something I'm uncertain about? Most managers are surprised anyone asks. All of them respect it. The no surprises rule: if there is one principle that outranks everything else in managing up, it is this: never let your manager be blindsided. Not by a missed deadline. Not by a client complaint. Not by a team conflict they should have heard about from you, not from someone else's Slack message. Not by a project quietly running off the rails while you hoped it would correct itself. Managers are not asking for perfection. Experienced managers, in particular, know that work is unpredictable and that things go sideways. What they cannot tolerate and what permanently damages trust is finding out about a problem after it was too late to help, or hearing about something from above before they heard it from below. Proactive communication is not just good form. It is the single habit that most reliably builds managerial trust over time. And the formula is simple: when something is uncertain, flag it early. When something has gone wrong, say so immediately. When your status changes, say so before someone asks. The cost of a 5-line heads-up is almost zero. The cost of a surprise in damaged trust, in your manager being caught unprepared, in the narrative that forms about your judgment, is enormous. Giving your boss what they need before they ask the jump from competent employee to trusted partner is largely about anticipation. It is about operating one step ahead of the explicit request. This looks like many small things. Preparing a summary before the one-on-one so the meeting has shape. Knowing which projects your manager needs to brief their own boss on this week, and making sure they have the information. Flagging a potential issue on Thursday so it doesn't land on Friday at 4:30. Coming to a problem with a proposed solution rather than a blank stare. None of this requires extraordinary effort. It requires paying attention to your manager's world, not just your own work, and making small investments in keeping them informed and prepared. A useful mental shift: think of your job not as completing your tasks, but as making your manager's job easier. The two overlap most of the time. When they don't, pay attention. That gap is often where career differentiation happens. Handling a difficult or micromanaging boss. Not every manager is Renata. Some are anxious, some are controlling, some are unclear, some are inconsistent, and some are genuinely bad at the job. Managing up doesn't stop being relevant in these situations, it becomes more important. A micromanaging boss is almost always anxious, not malicious. They check in frequently because they have learned, at some point, that things go wrong when they don't. The fastest way to reduce micromanagement is to remove the anxiety that drives it. This means giving status updates before they're requested, communicating proactively on anything uncertain, and demonstrating, through repetition, over time, that you do not need to be chased. This takes patience. It may take 2 months of consistent proactive communication before the check-ins start to loosen. But it is far more effective than resenting the oversight or trying to work around it. For a manager who is unclear or disorganized, bring the structure. Recap decisions at the end of conversations. Confirm priorities in writing. Send the summary email. You are not doing their job for them, you are protecting yourself from confusion and building a record of shared understanding. For a manager who is genuinely bad, dismissive, credit stealing, or creating real professional harm, managing up has limits. Those limits involve honest conversations, documentation, and in some cases, a larger decision about whether this is a relationship and an organization worth staying in. How to disagree with your manager and be heard. The working relationship requires honesty, not compliance. There will be decisions you think are wrong, directions you think are misguided, and calls you would have made differently. What you do with that disagreement says more about your judgment than the disagreement itself. The rule is simple: say it once, say it clearly, and then execute the final decision even if it wasn't yours. When you disagree, be specific. I have a different read on this. Lands differently that I'm worried this approach may underestimate the timeline by about 2 weeks. Here's what I'm seeing. The second version gives your manager something to engage with. The first just registers as friction. Ask for the reasoning. Often, what looks like a poor decision from where you sit is based on context you don't have. Can you help me understand what's driving this direction? Is not a challenge, it is a professional question that may change your view, or reveal that your concern is well-founded. And when your view doesn't prevail, execute without dragging your feet. Quiet non-compliance, going through the motions while signaling disagreement to colleagues, is visible and expensive. Managers remember the people who pushed back, lost the debate, and then worked hard anyway. The loyalty question. Managing up requires a certain loyalty, but it is not the unconditional kind. You are not your manager's defender regardless of what they do. You are a professional in a relationship that should work for both of you. The distinction that matters is between loyalty to the work and loyalty to the decision. You owe your full effort to executing decisions once they're made. You owe honest counsel before they're final. You do not owe silence when something is genuinely wrong, or complicity in behavior that crosses ethical lines. Within those boundaries, executing with commitment, not half-heartedly, not with visible reservation, is itself a form of respect that managers notice and remember. Building trust over time. The real goal of managing up is not any single exchange. It is not the perfectly timed Friday update or the well-framed disagreement. It is the accumulation of those exchanges into something more valuable than any one of them: a manager who trusts you completely, advocates for you spontaneously, and gives you room to operate. That kind of trust cannot be rushed or manufactured. It is built through the same mechanism as all professional reputation: repetition. You show up informed. You flag problems early. You execute without drama. You disagree with honesty and then commit. You do this not once, impressively, but consistently, quietly, over months. At some point, your manager stops thinking about whether you can be relied on. You become a given. And a manager who knows they can count on you completely will go out of their way to create opportunities, speak your name in rooms you're not in, and protect you when things get hard. That is the return on managing up. Not flattery returned. Not politics rewarded. Trust, earned honestly, compounding over time. Reflection. Take 15 minutes to sit with these questions honestly. 1. If your manager were asked right now what you're currently working on and how it's going, how accurately could they answer, and is that level of visibility intentional or accidental? 2. Think of the last time something went sideways on a project. Did your manager find out from you first, or from someone or something else? 3. What does your manager worry about most in their own job? Do you know? If not, what would it take to find out? The silent edge principle. Your manager cannot advocate for someone they have to chase. Make yourself the person they never have to wonder about. Chapter 9: How to Disagree Without Creating Enemies. The meeting had been going for 40 minutes when Daniel spoke up. The project lead, Serena, had just finished walking through a campaign strategy that the rest of the room had already started nodding along to. It was a sound plan, competent, organized, safe. And then Daniel said, quietly but clearly, "Serena, I think you've thought this through well, and I want to make sure I'm not missing something. Can I ask a few questions before we finalize?" Serena nodded. Daniel didn't mount a counterattack. He didn't announce that he had a better idea. He asked 3 specific, careful questions, each one exposing a gap in the plan's assumptions about their target audience. He wasn't combative. He wasn't performing. He was doing what a good colleague does, thinking out loud, in public, with the shared goal of getting it right. When Serena acknowledged that one of the gaps was real and worth addressing, Daniel simply said, "That's all I had. I think with that adjustment, this is a strong plan." He hadn't won anything. He hadn't lost anything. But every senior person in that room made a mental note, not about the campaign, but about Daniel. Here was someone who could push back without making it personal. Someone who disagreed without needing to win. Someone, in other words, who could be trusted with hard conversations. That is what principled disagreement looks like. And it is rarer than you think. The cost of saying nothing. Before we talk about how to disagree well, we have to be honest about what happens when you don't disagree at all. Most people avoid conflict because they believe silence is neutral. It isn't. When you consistently stay quiet in meetings where you have reservations, when you nod along to plans you think are flawed, when you swallow objections to keep the peace, you are sending a signal. The signal is, "I can be counted on not to cause trouble." And over time, that signal calcifies into something worse: "I can be counted on not to think critically." Your colleagues and managers aren't unaware of this. They see who challenges ideas and who doesn't. They may not say so directly, but they unconsciously weight the input of people who push back thoughtfully, carefully, more heavily than the input of people who agree with everything. Constant agreement reads as either passivity or dishonesty, and neither is a reputation you want. There is also a deeper cost. When you habitually suppress your real assessment of things, you lose something in yourself, a certain kind of professional confidence. You begin to wonder if your judgment matters, because you've trained yourself to keep it private. The habit of self-censorship starts to look indistinguishable from not having opinions at all. Eventually, to others, it is. Silence has a price. The bill just arrives later. The cost of disagreeing badly. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people who disagree often but do it badly. They interrupt. They contradict before fully listening. They treat every pushback as a fight to be won rather than a problem to be solved. They are so focused on being right that they lose sight of whether they're being useful. The people who disagree badly often do have good ideas. They may even be correct more often than not. But their approach generates friction that compounds over time. Colleagues start to dread their presence in meetings. Managers begin routing decisions around them, not because their judgment is poor but because engaging with them is exhausting. Slowly, they are excluded from the conversations that matter. They wonder why their career has stalled. They can't see that the reason isn't their intelligence, it's the way they deploy it. Disagreeing badly doesn't just damage your relationships. It damages your influence, which is the thing your intelligence was supposed to build. The framework, principled disagreement. There is a third way. It requires practice and intention, but it can be learned. Here is how it works. 1. Separate the idea from the person. This is the foundation. When someone presents a plan you think is flawed, your job is to engage with the plan, not with their competence, their judgment, or their ego. Keep your language precise. I'm not sure this assumption holds is different from I think you've got this wrong. One is an observation about the work. The other is an assessment of the person. Train yourself to make the distinction, especially when you're frustrated. 2. Acknowledge what's right before challenging what's wrong. This is not flattery. It is accuracy. Almost every idea has something in it that works. When you start by naming what is sound, you accomplish two things. You signal that you have genuinely engaged with the idea, and you make the person you're disagreeing with far less defensive. Defensive people stop listening. People who feel heard are more likely to actually consider your objection. 3. Ask questions instead of making counterstatements. This is the most powerful and underused tool in disagreement. Instead of announcing that you see the problem differently, ask a question that surfaces the problem. What's our assumption about how the client will respond here? Does more work than I don't think the client will respond that way. The first invites a conversation. The second starts a debate. Debates produce winners and losers. Conversations produce solutions. 4. State your position once, clearly, then stop. Once you've asked your questions and the gap you see is on the table, state your position directly. Not softened to the point of meaninglessness, but also not repeated 3 times for emphasis. Say it once, clearly, and let it land. Restating your objection over and over doesn't make it more persuasive, it makes you look anxious. Trust that the room heard you the first time. 5. Accept the outcome with grace, even if you lose. This is where most people stumble. If your objection is heard and the decision goes the other way anyway, you have a choice. You can sulk, hedge, or quietly signal that you disagree with the outcome. Or you can commit to the decision and move forward. The latter is not weakness. It is the mark of someone who distinguishes between having a position and being attached to winning. The people in that room will remember that you raised the concern. They will also remember whether you were a good colleague afterward. Group settings versus one-on-one. How you disagree should shift depending on the setting. In a group, the stakes are higher because more people are watching, including the person you're disagreeing with, who is also managing how they appear. Be particularly careful about making someone look foolish in front of their peers or superiors. If you can raise your concern in a way that preserves their standing while still putting the problem on the table, do that. The question framing helps enormously here. One-on-one disagreements afford more directness. Without an audience, people are generally less defensive, and you can have a real conversation. If you have a serious objection to something a colleague or manager is doing, a private conversation is almost always more effective than raising it in a meeting. It also signals respect. You're handling this between the two of you, not performing it for an audience. When to escalate, and when to let it go. Not every disagreement is worth pursuing. Part of professional maturity is learning to distinguish between the hills worth standing on and the ones worth leaving behind. Escalate when the stakes are genuinely high, when you believe the direction being taken will cause real harm to the project, the team, or the people involved, and when you've already raised the concern through normal channels without result. Let it go when your disagreement is primarily about preference rather than substance. When the decision has been made and revisiting it serves no purpose. When you've already said your piece and the outcome is what it is. Letting something go is not the same as agreeing with it. It is the recognition that you have a limited amount of credibility to spend, and some battles aren't worth the withdrawal. The long game here is what happens when you consistently disagree. Well, over time, people start to trust you with the truth. Your colleagues begin to assume that if you say something is fine, it is actually fine. Because they've seen you speak up when it wasn't. Your manager starts to bring hard problems to you because they know you'll give an honest read rather than a comfortable one. You're standing in the room. That intangible thing that Daniel learned in that meeting grows not because you agreed more but because your disagreements proved you were paying attention. Principled disagreement is one of the foundational currencies of professional trust. It is how people learn that you have standards, and that your approval means something. An environment where everyone agrees is an environment where no one is thinking. Being the person who thinks, carefully and without drama, is one of the rarest and most durable professional advantages there is. When someone disagrees with you, this chapter would be incomplete without addressing the other side of the table. At some point, someone will push back on your idea. They may do it badly, bluntly, publicly, without the grace this chapter has been advocating. The question is how you respond. The first instinct, for most people, is defensiveness. Resist it. Not because the criticism might not be unfair, it may well be, but because defensiveness closes you off at precisely the moment you need to stay open. Listen to the objection fully before deciding what you think of it. Ask a clarifying question if you need one. Then assess, is there something real here, or is this noise? If there is something real, say so. That's a fair point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Costs you nothing and earns you a great deal. People who can acknowledge a good challenge to their own thinking are rare. They are also the people everyone wants in the room. If the objection misses the mark, don't fight it in the moment. Address it calmly, briefly, and move on. You don't need to win the exchange. You need to stay composed and keep the conversation productive. How you receive disagreement is as much a part of your professional reputation as how you deliver it. Disagreement prep checklist before raising an objection, especially in a meeting or formal setting. Run through these questions. What specifically do I disagree with? Be precise. Vague discomfort is not a position. What do I think is right about this idea? If you can't name anything, you haven't thought about it enough. What is the real concern? Is it about the idea's logic, its assumptions, its likely outcome? Name it. Is this the right moment and setting? Would this be better raised privately first? What is my goal? To improve the outcome, or to be seen as smart? The answer matters. Am I prepared to accept a different decision? If not, what will you do with that? How will I say this once, clearly, without repeating myself? You don't need to answer every question at length. But running through them quickly will keep you from saying something you'll spend the next week trying to walk back. Reflection 1. Think of a recent situation where you stayed silent when you had a real concern. What did that silence cost you, in credibility, in outcome, in your own sense of yourself? 2. Think of a time when you disagreed badly, when you were right, but the way you delivered it damaged something. What would you do differently? 3. How do you currently respond when someone pushes back on your ideas? Are you more likely to capitulate to keep the peace, or to dig in to protect your position? What would the middle ground look like for you? The silent edge principle: the person who can disagree without attacking, and concede without collapsing, is the person everyone eventually trusts to tell them the truth. Chapter 10. Your reputation is built when you're not looking. David had been at the company for 11 years when he retired. There was a small gathering, the kind companies organize when they don't know quite how to mark the occasion of a long, steady career. His manager gave a short speech. A few colleagues shared memories. And then something unrehearsed happened. A woman named Sonal, who ran the accounts payable team on the second floor, stood up without being asked. Nobody had told her to speak. She wasn't in David's reporting line. They had worked in adjacent departments for 6 years, overlapping occasionally on cross-functional projects, sharing little more than corridor nods and the occasional email thread. "I want to say something," she said. "Because I don't think David knows this, and I think he should." She told the room that 3 years ago, during a rough quarter when headcount was being discussed, David had gone to the CFO and made the case to protect 2 roles on her team, roles she hadn't even known were under threat. He hadn't told her. He never mentioned it. She found out from someone else 18 months later. "I've spent my whole career watching how people act when they think no one is looking," she said. David is the same person in every room. He sat quietly through all of it. When it was his turn to speak, he said only, "I don't know how to take credit for just being normal." The room laughed. But some people in that room, especially the younger ones, sat with that line for a long time afterward. Just being normal. Behaving the same way, in every room, whether or not anyone was watching. That is the whole thing. That is the silent edge. The empty room principle. There is a test for professional character that no interview, no performance review, and no leadership assessment has ever fully captured. It is simple, it is ruthless, and it runs constantly in the background of every organization you will ever work in. The test is this: who are you when the room is empty? Not who are you when your manager is present. Not who are you when the stakes are visible and the audience is watching. Who are you when the intern is the only other person in the room? When the project has already failed and the postmortem is over? When the credit has been given to someone else and the meeting has moved on and nobody is tracking how you respond? This is where reputation actually forms. Not in the headline moments, the big presentation, the visible win, the well-timed comment that lands in front of the right person. Those moments matter, but they are too rare and too observed to be where character reveals itself. Character reveals itself in the texture of ordinary days, in how you speak to the cleaner in the elevator, in whether you CC the junior colleague who did the work, in whether you take the last biscuit without asking. These feel like small things because they are small. But reputation is made almost entirely of small things, accumulated over years, seen by dozens of people you have already stopped thinking about. The empty room principle is not about performance. It is about consistency. It is the decision, taken quietly and renewed daily, to be the same person whether you are observed or not. Not because someone might notice. Not because it will pay off. But because the version of yourself that only shows up when the stakes are high is not really you, it is a costume, and costumes slip. The people who command the deepest respected work are not the ones who gave the best presentations or managed the most visible projects. They are the ones who were, according to every person who ever worked alongside them, exactly who they appeared to be. How reputation compounds. Most people think of reputation the way they think of a credit score, something to be checked and managed, damaged, and repaired in roughly equal measure. This is the wrong mental model. Reputation compounds. Like financial interest, it grows slowly at first, nearly imperceptibly, and then, after enough time, it becomes overwhelming. In your first year at an organization, your reputation is barely formed. People are still collecting data on you. Every consistent behavior is adding a small weight to one side of the scale or another. At this stage, a single bad day can temporarily reverse a week of good ones. The system is sensitive because it has so little information. But by year 3 or 4, something has shifted. The sediment, as we described in the very first chapter of this book, has settled. People no longer update their impression of you easily. A bad day is filed as an exception. A good week is absorbed as confirmation. You have become, in the minds of your colleagues, a known quantity, and known quantities are either assets or liabilities, rarely neutral. By year 7 or 8, your reputation is essentially a force field. It precedes you into every meeting, every conversation, every new project. People who have never worked directly with you have already formed a view, because someone they trust has told them who you are. Your reputation is now traveling to rooms you will never enter. This is why the early years matter so much more than they feel like they do. The interest compounds quietly while you are not paying attention. The person who is reliably calm under pressure for 18 months straight will find, eventually, that the organization simply assumes they will be calm, and that assumption protects them in ways that never need to be announced. The person who cuts corners in small, invisible ways for 18 months will find the same compounding works in the other direction. Nothing catastrophic happens. But over time, the small doubts accumulate into a persistent background note that follows them into every important decision made about their career. You are always in the early years of something. Every new team, every new manager, every new role is a fresh ledger. The question is not whether compounding is happening. It always is. The question is which direction it is running. The 3 moments that define you in a career of thousands of interactions and decisions, most will leave no lasting mark. But there are 3 types of moments that cut deeper than the rest, moments when reputation is not just built but revealed. How do you handle failure? Yours and other people's. Failure is ordinary. Every person in every organization fails regularly, misses a deadline, overestimates a timeline, makes a call that turns out to be wrong. What is not ordinary is how people respond when it happens. The professional who handles their own failure without excuse-making, without deflection, without the subtle art of distributing blame, who says plainly, "That was my call and it was wrong, here is what I am doing differently," earns a form of trust that success never generates. Success is expected. Honest ownership of failure is rare. And how you respond to other people's failures matters equally, perhaps more. When a junior colleague makes a visible mistake, every person watching that interaction is quietly asking the same question: is this person safe to work with? The colleague who quietly absorbs some of the blast, who responds with calm rather than reproach, who privately coaches rather than publicly corrects, that person becomes someone others will go to the wall for. That loyalty does not announce itself. It simply shows up when you need it. How you treat people with less power than you. This is the one that is hardest to fake, because it is almost never strategic. Nobody is watching. There is no benefit to being decent to the new temp, to the facilities manager, to the person 3 levels below you in the organization chart. Except that someone is always watching. Not in a surveillance sense, but in the human sense that people notice how people treat people. The executive assistant who watches how visitors treat her, who is warm and who is dismissive, has cataloged this data for years and has more influence over access, information, and informal trust than most people realize. The junior analyst who watches how a senior colleague speaks to the intern will tell that story a decade later when they are the one making hiring decisions. Treating everyone with the same basic respect is not a tactic. It is character. But it also, quietly, relentlessly, builds a reputation that money cannot buy and performance reviews cannot measure. How you behave during pressure and conflict. Pressure is the solvent that dissolves pretense. Most people can be generous, patient, and collaborative when things are going well. The question that reputation answers is, what are you like when the quarter is bad, when the launch is failing, when 2 colleagues have reached an impasse and the room is tense? The person who narrows under pressure, who becomes territorial, sharp, or withdrawn, reveals something that their colleagues do not forget. Not because one incident is damning, but because pressure will come again, and now people know what to expect. The person who maintains steadiness when others are not steady, who speaks more carefully, not less, who slows down rather than accelerates, who keeps the long view visible when everyone else is reacting to the immediate, this person becomes, over time, someone that the organization leans toward in difficulty. That leaning is informal, unwritten, and deeply powerful. These 3 moments do not announce themselves in advance. They arrive as ordinary days, and most people respond as their habits dictate. This is why habits matter more than intentions. What you plan to do under pressure is almost entirely irrelevant. What your habits have trained you to do is what will emerge. Why you cannot manage your reputation directly here is a thing that ambitious people learn the hard way. The moment you start trying to manage your reputation, curating your image, calibrating your visibility, engineering the right kind of credit, you begin to do the one thing that consistently damages reputation: you begin to perform. And performance, in sustained close quarters, is always detected. Not in any single instance, but over time, in the slightly off quality that people can feel but not name. The person who is warm to the right people and cold to the wrong ones. The person who is visibly humble in public and quietly resentful in private. The person who advocates loudly for their team in rooms where their team can hear, but does not follow through in rooms where they cannot. Reputation cannot be managed. It can only be earned through behavior that is consistent enough and long enough that no reasonable person can explain it as performance. This is the difficult news. It means there are no shortcuts. No personal branding exercise, no well-placed comment to the right senior leader, no carefully engineered narrative will substitute for years of quiet, consistent behavior in unremarkable circumstances. But it is also, if you sit with it, good news. Because it means your reputation is not in the hands of the people who rate you, the colleagues who may be competing with you, or the organizational politics that seem unfair. It is in your hands, daily, in every interaction that seems too small to matter. The legacy question at some point, perhaps today, perhaps years from now, the people who have worked with you will describe you to someone else. Not in a performance review. In a corridor, at a dinner, in an off-the-record moment when someone asks, what is it actually like to work with her? What will they say? Not what do you hope they will say. What will they actually say, based on what you have actually done, in the ordinary moments of the last few years? This is the legacy question, and it is worth sitting with honestly. Not as a source of shame, but as a compass. Because it is still early. Whatever has compounded so far, in either direction, can be influenced. Not overnight. Not through a single grand gesture. But through the persistent, unglamorous work of behaving well in small moments, again and again, until that behavior is simply who you are. Exercise. The legacy letter: set aside 20 minutes. Find somewhere quiet. Then write a letter, not from you, but from a colleague you respect, written about you 10 years from now. The letter should be addressed to someone asking about you as a professional. It should describe what it was actually like to work with you. Not what your resume says. Not what your title was. What it was like to be in a difficult meeting with you, to bring you a problem, to watch how you handled a failure, to observe how you spoke to people who had less power than you. Write it in their voice, not yours. Most people find this exercise uncomfortable. That discomfort is information. The gap between the letter you write and the letter you wish someone would write is the work that remains. Read what you have written. Then ask yourself 3 things: is this who I am? Is this who I am becoming? If not, what specifically would I need to change? Keep the letter. Return to it in a year. Reflection 1. Think of someone in your professional life who commands deep, unspoken respect, not because of their title, but because of who they are. What specific behaviors, small or large, have contributed to that? 2. In the last month, in what moments might you have behaved differently if you had known someone you deeply respect was watching? What does that gap tell you? 3. If the people who work around you, not above you, but around you, peers, juniors, support staff, were asked to describe you in 2 sentences, what do you honestly believe they would say? Coming back to where we started, this book began with Priya and the blazer that nobody remembered. It offered a simple premise, that professional respect is not announced, it is accumulated. That the habits which matter most are the ones nobody notices in the moment, the restraint that keeps you from speaking too soon, the consistency that makes you predictable in the best way, the body language that signals calm when everyone else is tense, the way you manage upward without losing yourself, the small daily choices to treat every person in every room as if they matter. These chapters did not offer tricks. They offered a different way of understanding what work actually is, not a series of performances to be optimized, but a long, continuous relationship with the people around you. A relationship that rewards character over cleverness, patience over urgency, and integrity over image. None of this is easy. If it were easy, Priya would not be in the majority. Consistency is hard. Restraint is hard. Behaving the same way when no one is watching is harder still. The habits described in this book require daily renewal. There will be weeks when you fall short. When you speak too quickly, react too sharply, let a small thing slide that you should not have. This is not failure. This is being human. What matters is the direction. Not perfection, but pattern. The silent edge principle: finally, your reputation is not what you say about yourself. It is what remains of you after you leave the room. Protect it not by managing it, but by earning it one unremarkable moment at a time. David spent 11 years being the same person in every room. He did not have a strategy for this. He had a habit. And on the day he left, a woman from accounts payable stood up, without being asked, to tell a room full of people what that habit had built. That is the silent edge. It does not announce itself. It does not need to. Begin today. Not with a grand declaration, but with a small decision, one meeting, one corridor conversation, one moment when no one is watching. Choose who you are in that moment. Then do it again tomorrow. That is all. That is enough. Over time, it becomes everything.